Good day, scholars. Welcome to our next reading lesson. We are today in our blue reading book just for a couple more stories, scholars, and then we're going to be actually putting this aside again. But we are today on lesson 98 in our Iditarod Adventures stories. So be sure you have your packet and your book. Press pause if you need to grab those things and get to lesson 98. All right. Now, before we jump in, I do want to remind you that today there will be two assignments in this post. One is answering the questions in your packet, but then you're also going to have 3 questions to answer about events in the story, putting events from the story in order, right? What happened first, what happened second, and what happened third. You may use the story to help you with that. Right? Finding evidence, getting those 3 events in order, right? What happened first, what happened second, and what happened third. I also want to just remind you of 2 real, right, true people we've talked about during this story. The story, remember, itself is fictional, but we've read about 2 people who were actually in the Iditarod race. This first one is Susan Butcher. Remember, Susan Butcher entered the race 17 times and finished 16 times and won the race 4 times. And Libby Riddles, remember, was the first woman to win the Iditarod, and she won in 1985. 1985 was the one year, right? She finished 16 times. So the one year that Susan Butcher did not finish was the year that this had happened. I shared this with you earlier, but it's a good reminder, right? In 1985, that was the year Susan Butcher didn't finish the race. That year, her dogs were attacked by a moose on a trail. 2 of her dogs were killed, sadly, and 13 of them were injured. So that was the year she had to drop out of the race, the year that Libby Riddles won the race, right? The first woman to win it. And then Susan Butcher went on to win it 4 times after that. Not quite 4 times in a row, but almost. All right, let's get started on lesson 98 today. We are starting with vocabulary words. So touching column 1, that first word is arrangements. What word? Right, arrangements. When you make arrangements to do something, you make a plan to do that thing. So if you plan to take a trip, you make arrangements for the trip. All right, word 2 is congratulate. What word? Correct, congratulate. When you congratulate somebody, you praise that person for something they did well, right? If you do a great job of putting your 3 events in order on today's assignment, right? Perhaps I will congratulate you, praise you for doing such a great job. Word 3, beware. What word? Right, beware. 4 is crust. What word? Right, crust. And word 5 is dried. Dried is the past tense of dry. Dried. What word? Right, dried. Let's go to column 2. Column 2, all these words have suffixes, right? Endings added to the root words. So scholars, I'm going to give you the root word, and I want you to tell me that word with its suffix. So word 1, the root word is shelter, and we've added the ed, d, t, past tense ending suffix to make right, sheltered. Things that are sheltered are protected. If you are sheltered from the wind, you are protected from the wind. If you're sheltered from the snow, it means you're protected from the snow. Word 2, the root word is tarp, and we're adding the suffix s to make what word? Right, tarps. So tarps would be more than one. A tarp is a plastic covering made of canvas or plastic. Right? If you have more than one tarp, you have tarps. Number 3, that root word is plunge, and we're adding the ed-t past tense ending suffix to make plunged is correct. And number 4, that root word is tuck, and we're adding the suffix ing to make, right, tucking. If you were at school right now in the building, I'd probably have to remind some of you to be tucking in your shirts. Tucking. All right, part B. Now, scholars, before we read this information passage about part B, if you feel like you need to practice any of those vocabulary words again, press pause for a moment, read through them, practice them. Otherwise, let's go to part B. So we are going to read our next story about Chad and the Iditarod race, but this information passage first is going to give us some information about rest periods. Ready? Rest periods. One rule of the Iditarod is that every musher must take a 24-hour rest at one of the checkpoints and an 8-hour rest at 2 of the other checkpoints. This rule was put in so that dogs would not have to work so hard that they collapsed on the trail. So let's check on that before we continue. So how many long 24-hour stops must they make? Right, 1. So one time they have to stop for a whole 24 hours. Every musher has to do that. And then they have to make 2 other stops that aren't as long. How long do those 2 stops have to be? Right, 8 hours long. And this rule was put in place to help whom? To help the dogs. Is that what you said? Right. It's a rule put in place to help the dogs because the dogs are working very hard. All right. During the first years of the race, a lot of dogs died from injury, starvation, and working too hard. During the first year of the race, 1973, so scholars, in 1973, I was 2 years old. So this race has been going on for a while. Right? In 1973, 30 dogs died during the race. Even today, with all the care that mushers take to make sure their dogs are treated well, 2 or 3 dogs die during every race. Wow. That's not a large number if you remember that there may be 800 dogs entered in a race, but it's still more dogs than anybody wants to die. So scholars, think about that. So let's check on just a couple more quick things before we wrap up this paragraph, this information passage. What year was the first race held? Did you go back and look? 1973. And how many dogs died in that race? Right, the first year, 30 dogs died during the race. That's horrible, isn't it? And now, even today, right, in more modern time, 2 or 3 dogs die each year. Now, scholars, this was written a while ago, so I'm going to do a little digging and checking on that and see if I can find out in more recent races if that's still what's happening. Because hopefully there's a lot better care and compassion for the dogs. So I'm going to look into that and I'll let you know what I find out. All right. Before we go to part C, I want you to pause for a moment and read this information passage aloud, either to yourself, to a pet. Maybe you have a pet dog and your dog would love to hear about these changes that were made to help keep dogs safer. And then we'll continue. All right. Ready for part C? Continuing our story. Beware of streams. That's quite a title today. It was day 9 of the race, and Chad was lost again. Does anyone remember what day it was when he had reached Rainy Pass and it was so stormy? Yes, that was on day 3. So now we've jumped ahead to day 9. So if you take a quick look at the map, right, you can find where Chad is now on day 9 and where he was on day 3. Right? Are you noticing day 9? Right? He's getting close to the end of the race, isn't he? He started way back at Anchorage and it ends at Nome. So he's getting pretty close. So day 9, so he has left, right, at least checkpoint 16 and is somewhere in between 16. Oh, if we follow the end of the red, I bet that's where he is. So he's between maybe 18 and 19 right now. Or maybe that's where he's going to be during the whole time. So he's somewhere in there, right? Between 16 and 19. All right, let's continue. After he left Rainy Pass, things went pretty smoothly for 3 days. Then the weather turned bad again. Chad's team went only about 50 miles one day and 50 miles the next day. The winds and weather were so bad that he didn't feel it was safe to try to go any farther. Today started out a lot better, but about halfway between checkpoint 18 and 19, a terrible storm moved in. Chad could not see the lead dogs, and sometimes he couldn't see the wheel dogs. So, scholars, I hear a good cause and effect for us to talk about for a moment. Let's think about that. First of all, imagine it being so stormy you can't see the dogs right in front of your sled, right? Let alone the dogs that are the lead dogs way at the front, might be about 50 to 60 feet away. You can't see them. That had happened before. But now it's so stormy he can't even see the dogs right in front of him. Yikes. So, what's causing him to not be able to see the wheel dogs? Right? What's causing that? Did you say a terrible storm? Right? That's the cause. The effect is that because of that storm, right, he can't see his lead dogs and sometimes not even his wheel dogs. Wow. He found a sheltered place and stayed there for more than 2 hours. Then he tried to move on. Within an hour, he had lost the trail. He headed north along the ocean, hoping that he would find the trail again, but as the team was slowly crossing a low area, one of the worst possible things happened. The sled was going over a thick crust of frozen snow. Below that snow was a fast-moving stream. Chad didn't know that until the back of the sled suddenly broke through the crust of ice and fell into the water below. Oh my goodness, scholars. So if you take a quick look at that picture, right, you're seeing the sled fall into that hole that broke in the ice. And the wheel dogs, right, look like they're being pulled backward into the hole as well. Whew. The air temperature was around 0. If a person gets wet at that temperature, that person could easily die of freezing. Oh, scholars, I heard another cause and effect we could talk about, right? So, what could cause you to easily die by freezing at that temperature? What could cause you, right? The cause. Right. Getting wet at that temperature. Getting wet at that temperature is the cause. What could happen if you get wet at that temperature is the effect. You could easily die by freezing. Well, Chad got wet. The rear end of the sled plunged into the water. The front end of the sled was pointing up. As Chad was trying to climb up the front of the sled, the snow cracked again, and the wheel dogs fell in the water. Chugger let out a cry. The team stopped. Denali and Butch looked back. Chad was up to his chest in the water. He had to get the sled out of the water quickly. You get why? Yeah, if he doesn't get out quickly, right, they're going to freeze. Right? That cold water, the dogs and him. Denali and Butch were the dogs that had to pull the sled out. Mush! Chad shouted. Mush, Denali! Mush, Butch! Mush! They did. They got low and strained as they pulled forward. Mush! Slowly, the team dragged Chugger and Buck out of the water. Then the sled came out, with streams of water flowing from it. So, scholars, Chad was chest deep in the water. And which two dogs did we hear were doing the pulling? Be careful, look back if you need to. Right, Butch and Denali were doing the pulling. And which two dogs were in the water with Chad? Look back if you need to. Right, Chugger and Buck. Chad was soaked. He knew that he had only minutes to get warm or he would freeze. He drove the team to a grove of trees. He noticed that Chugger was not able to pull. Then Chad quickly removed some tarps from the sled and hung them from the trees so they made a tent. He quickly unpacked dry clothes from the sled and some emergency wood. This wood was treated and it would burn even if it were wet. So, scholars, hold that spot. Right, we just passed the blue star, so we're at the next paragraph, as the wind howled. Let me ask you a couple questions about what we just read. If you look at that picture, right, you can see Chad heading toward the tent that he made from the tarp. And what's he going to do with that wood? Right, he's going to build a fire. And he's going to put on those other clothes. How much time does he have to do all of those things? Right, just a couple of minutes. Right, if he doesn't get that all taken care of really quickly, they're going to freeze. And if they freeze, they're going to die. All right, scholars, I want you to continue on, read the rest of this story to yourself, and then I have a few questions for you at the end. Press pause and read the rest carefully right now. All right, let's see how you did with your reading. What things did Chad do inside the tent? Let's see if you named any of these. He built a fire. He changed clothes. He dried off Chugger and wrapped Chugger in a blanket, right? So she's now wrapped in a blanket. He did not do those things outside of the tent because of how cold it is. So which dog failed right? Which dog can't seem to work anymore, can't pull? Right, Chugger. Now you might remember the vet had told Chad that Chugger had a problem with her hip, right? Now, do you have thoughts on why Chad didn't leave Buck on the gang line and just replace Chugger with Denali or Butch? So he also took Butch off, right? So, right. Hopefully your answer had something to do with, right? Buck is used to working with Chugger, right? They're a team. They're used to working together and know how to do this work together. And Denali and Butch are used to working together. So he wants to keep dogs together that are used to working together. Did Chad have trouble finding the trail again? No. This time he found the trail pretty easily, and he saw whose sled? Right, Siri Carlson's. So, which two dogs are now his wheel dogs? Yes, Denali and Butch. And which dog is in the sled? Right, Chugger. And which dog is walking behind the sled? Right, Buck. Remember, Buck's not injured. He just doesn't want an odd number of dogs. And Buck and Chugger are used to working together. So injured Chugger is in the sled, and Buck is just walking or running along behind the sled, right? Not having to do any pulling. All right, scholars, I want you to make sure now that you join me in the video for the assignment. And remember, there's two things to do today. One is your assignment in the Iditarod Adventures packet. And the second one, there's an assignment to put 3 events in order, right? What happened first, what happened second, and what happened third. Be sure to do both assignments today. All right? Thanks for joining me, scholars.